Scripture reading will be from Isaiah 49:2. Isaiah 49:2. He has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadows of his hand he has concealed me. And he has also made me a select arrow, that he has hidden me in his quiver.
So if you knew my dad, he worked and loved working with youth over many years and in many ways. And one of the things he did when I was in my 20s, he bought a school bus. It actually belonged to a Christian school in Rifle, at Rifle Church of Christ, if you know where that is, past Glenwood. And he got it so that for various activities, the youth could have something to kind of travel in. It's kind of a long story, so I'm trying to keep it short. But basically, it was to transport young people for different activities. And a friend of mine, John Rabb, he and I at one point were in charge of transporting some young people to California and back in this school bus. So you can imagine this. There's many, many stories that are connected to this school bus. It's just kind of asking for stories when you do something like that. So one of them involves one of the times that I almost left the earth early, but mainly a lot of fun. But I thought I wanted to tell you about one in particular. It's kind of hard to explain, but just know that the bus was relatively reliable. And we were traveling. I think there was John and I. Dad wasn't on this trip, but John and I were in charge of transporting, I think, about 10 young people, and we were heading to California. So we went over the mountains and we got to Arizona, and at least in this case, I had been driving for a while and I'd been awake for about 24 hours. It just kind of turned out that way. We're just kind of going straight through, you know, when you're young and you think you're indestructible. And so we were driving and driving and driving, got to Arizona, and that's when I learned that they have snow in Arizona. I did not know that until this trip. And I remember specifically Flagstaff, Arizona, and the snow was coming down. It's a different kind of snow. I don't know how else to describe it, I guess, except that it was serious. It was in a hurry to get to the ground and stay there, and it was coming down fast. The defroster on the bus wasn't working that great. A lot of the things on the bus did work, but the defroster not so much, because it started to kind of fog up, and I remember there was about a patch this big, about the size of a volleyball or something, that I could kind of see through. Everybody was asleep. I think it was probably a good thing. It was night. There was a couple friends up with me kind of helping, but I remember being hunched over the wheel and trying to make my way through this blizzard. And if we'd known how bad it was going to be, we would not have gone, but we were kind of stuck. And I remember we're going up this hill. The snow's coming down. It was so bad that I couldn't see the edge of the road. It was just pure white out there, and we're going up through a mountainous area, and the only thing I had to go by was the tracks of the vehicle that had gone before me. That's what I was following. That's all I had to go on. If they had gone off some cliff, we would have joined them. We just assumed that they had made it. So we're following this, and to make it even more interesting, the incline was a little bit more difficult for the bus, and so no matter how much I kept gearing down to go to a lower gear, the hill just kept being mean to the bus, and the bus got slower and slower. I went to third gear, I went to second gear, and we just finally, the poor bus just couldn't go any farther. I don't know exactly what was wrong with it, but no matter, even if I went down to first, the engine was running and everything, but we just couldn't go any farther. And I was kind of afraid to pull over too far because I didn't know where the edge was. So I kind of eased over a little bit and stopped because there was no other option. And then we discovered that I had not done very well at finding the edge of the road. I was more like in the middle, because cars that were still functioning were passing us on either side. So I had essentially planted us in the middle of the road. So you can imagine, it's one thing to do that to yourself, but it's another to do that when you're responsible for other people. So we did not know what to do. I don't know how long we were there. If I remember right, it wasn't very long, and a truck pulled up. It was kind of those maintenance trucks, kind of a pickup truck that gets things done. And this guy pulled up in front of us and kind of backed up in front of us and got out and said, "What's going on?" And so, "We don't know. Can you help us out?" And so he went to his toolkit. He opened up the hood of the bus, and I'd say within 15, 20 minutes, he found the exact thing that we needed. I don't know what this magic piece was, but he put it in our bus, and it was fine. And we, of course, were like, "Thank you so much." And he said, "I'm happy to help." And he drove on, and then we drove on. Made it into Flagstaff, if I remember right. It was the edge of it, and there was a Denny's there. Just so happened we pulled up into the parking lot, and there's this guy. And we were like, "Hey, thanks for doing this. So would you take like a little bit of money?" And with great reluctance, he finally accepted a little bit from us, but it was nothing that would match the value of what he had done for us. So we sat for a while, very relieved that he had come our way, and so we packed up to leave. We said goodbye, thanks again. We're never going to see him again, and we got back on the bus to head on out. And we were just about to pull out, and he came running out of the Denny's, and he had one of the girls' purse. She had left her purse in there. He came running out and says, "Is this yours?" He says, "Yes." We said, "Could you please just come with us? Because we need you," apparently. And he laughed, and we kind of went on our way, and we never saw him again. The reason I tell you this story is just one of those odd stories. When I think about the right place and the right time, I think of this guy. I don't know his name, but I don't know. It would have been a different ending. We may have survived a different way, but he was the right person in the right time in the right place. He had the right peace. He had the right talents. Everything was there for what we needed. I bet you can think of times when you were in a situation and it was perfect. The person that arrived, they were there at the right time at the right place. I bet you even have more fond memories if you got to be the one in the truck, so to speak, kind of pulling up at the right time in the right place. It's not always big, though. I bet you can think of situations, it was just a conversation, and it was very, very important. In fact, that determined the course of your life. And it was the right time at the right place. One that comes to my mind, bringing up my dad again, I remember a specific conversation that he and I had that determined my decision about what I would do for a career. I remember the conversation very, very well. And it was a big, big deal. I remember being at camp years ago, and I don't even remember her name, but there was somebody else working there, and this girl, you know how people write down a nice scripture reference? I don't know what it was, but it was the right time and the right place. To this day, I can't think of the first part of Colossians 3 without thinking of her. I don't even remember her name, but it made an impact. But the point, of course, is that you never know when it'll be the right time in the right place. You could say, well, with 7 billion people crawling all over the world, you can imagine something like that's going to happen just out of sheer coincidence. They'll be in the right time, in the right place. But now when it comes to spiritual matters, I really believe that God is deeply involved. I think it's very, you have to be cautious about second-guessing God's providence, but I think you look back on situations and say, that person was there at the right time in the right place. I think about Isaiah, because God is very good at placing people. I'm going to read part of Isaiah 6. If you want to look at this with me, we'll look at a few passages tonight along these lines. Isaiah 6, I'm going to start reading verse 1 and read a little bit here. God is very good at placing people. Those who belong to him are very, very effective as instruments in his hands. And he can find the perfect time and the perfect place to get a certain job done. In Isaiah 6, starting with verse 1, what's going on? I don't know if you recall that Isaiah, he had a very unique assignment. He was sent to this broken kingdom. There was the north part and the south part, and the north part had been destroyed and taken away by Assyria. And Isaiah's job was to go to the south part, Judah, which remained, and say, you guys need to get your act together, or you're going to be like Israel. That crater to the north, so to speak, that's your future unless you get your act together. So he is given this job. And at one point, he's allowed a vision, in essence, to experience the presence of God. And you'll notice his reaction, and you'll notice the results. Here's Isaiah 6, starting with verse 1. It says, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. So he's allowed an audience with God. He's going to be in the presence of God, and he's going to survive it. Today, often people think, I just want to be in God's presence. This passage alone is a good reminder that you better be prepared, because here's Isaiah's reaction. He is not initially comforted. Here's verse 5. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips. Some of your versions say, I am undone. I'm ruined, I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then, so he's not left to just despair in his unworthiness. Verse 6, Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, because remember, he's a man of unclean lips. And your iniquity or sin is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. We've heard that before. Here am I, send me. He says, I have this job to do, and it's going to be difficult. He prepares him for this assignment, and then Isaiah steps forward and says, Here am I. What's going to happen is he's saying, I want to be the right person in the right place. I see this assignment in front of me. I want to be that. I read this and I think, I want to say that, but many times I think the way I live my life, I hope somebody else next to me says, Here am I. And I'll be like, that's great, good. I'll applaud you as you do what needs to be done. I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy in the truck, shows up out of the blizzard and rescues everybody. I think all of us deep down want to be that person. But most of the time, I'm more like Gideon. And I want to take a look at him really quick. This is Judges 6. So the first one is in Isaiah 6. This is Judges 6. And in some ways, he's kind of similar to Isaiah, but there's a key difference. So here's the situation. You probably recall that the book of Judges is a lot of ups and downs. The people would reject God. He would allow an enemy to come in and devastate them. Then they would have remorse and call on God for help, and he would send a hero or a judge. It's not the guys in the black robes. It's probably a more appropriate translation of the word is hero. They were there to judge the situation and do something about it. Here's Judges 6, starting with verse 1. So here's the situation at the time. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Again, you could almost add. And the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens, which were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. So what they basically have to do, because they're being oppressed by the Midianites, is come up with these little hiding spots in the mountains. So they're so oppressed they have to hide in these little holes to kind of make do. Here's verse 4. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian. And the sons of Israel cried to the Lord. Now it came about, when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord on account of Midian, that the Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel, and he said to them, this prophet, Thus says the Lord the God of Israel. It was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you from the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors, and dispossessed them before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not obeyed me. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. So here's the situation. It's a bad, bad situation. The bad guys, the Midianites, are so oppressive. Everybody has to kind of lay low. Every time they get some food together and things look like they're going to be good, they come in and just ravage the place. They steal it. They devastate them. And we meet Gideon, and here he is, secretly gathering food. He's hiding out because the Midianites could easily take away everything. He's in a low position, a low spot. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. Here he is scraping together a meal, and he calls him a valiant warrior. This is Gideon's response. Verse 13, then Gideon said to him, oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. So this time and place had a big problem, and God had a solution. And you notice the conversation, Gideon is saying, where's like it used to be? Can you solve this? And God's going to. As you well know, Judges 6:14, the Lord looked at him and said, go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? And like Moses, very soon after this, Gideon goes on to give all the reasons why he's not a good candidate for this. But God says, oh yeah, I'm going to solve the problem, and you're the solution, Gideon. It's kind of like with Isaiah. The conversation ended with, here am I. But with Gideon, the end of the conversation went, here is you. Gideon was not so keen about jumping up and saying, I'm ready. God said, you're ready. It's going to be you. I tend to be like Gideon. Sometimes, we don't feel valuable. But God says, you're the answer. You're the right person at the right time. And it's hard for us to think that because a lot of times we feel surrounded by more capable people, or the situation might kind of seem too overwhelming, kind of like Gideon felt. But don't be surprised. You need to be ready. There's a reason you're here. I've shared with some of you before, I was not on the calendar. Nobody expected me when I was born. I mean, there was a 9 months heads up, but up until that point, it was not the plan. And I think about that sometimes, that no one expected me except God. I believe that he knew every person that was ever to be born, even as he was creating the world. And he knows everything about me. He knows everything about you. Look at Psalm 139. This is how well he knows you. I think it's really important to remind ourselves that he does not just look at the world. He knows each individual soul, and he knows each individual soul even better than the individual soul knows themselves. Psalm 139, starting at verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thoughts from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. In other words, I can't even grasp how well you know everything. It's far beyond me. And you know me so well. I really don't think that God lets the world spin and then tries to find something of use. I don't think he just kind of looks over the situation and look at what's already there and then tries to find some way to make it relevant. I believe that when the things that we read about in the Bible, he arranged the setting. He arranged the setting for his word to arrive. A lot of people believe that God presented the word to the world and that the culture kind of had to shape it, that the world submitted to the culture of the time. Keep in mind, God's omniscience and omnipresence, he's able to arrange the culture in which his word would arrive. The word did not submit to culture. The culture was the stage, the exact one that he wanted. And then sometimes we think that God is kind of lightened up. We read from Genesis to Revelation like we're doing as a congregation, and we think, yeah, this is when the big stuff happened. And rightly so. I mean, there's no argument that the crucial moment on the cross and the resurrection, everything's balanced on that. But we kind of tend to think that it's all over, and now we're just kind of biding our time. The big stuff is still going on. Just because we're not recorded by name in the Bible does not mean that the big stuff is not going on. In fact, you could easily remember that the Bible was written down for our situation right now. All of that occurred. All of it was written down for our situation right now. You're just as vital as Isaiah and Gideon. Just as vital. In fact, keep your spot in Psalm 139. Look at verse 16. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. In other words, before I'd spent day number 1 on this planet, God knew every single day of my life. So it only makes sense that someone who is perfectly omniscient and aware of every single detail is going to be able to use us very well if we allow him. You have always been part of his plan. I don't think I have to pull my punch at all. When he was creating what we read about in Genesis 1, he had you in mind. I think he knew about this meeting that we're having right now while he was creating the stars. I think that's how knowledgeable and aware he is. You've always been part of the plan. You've always been the possible solution to the right time and the right place. There's one particular verse that kind of got me thinking in this direction, and it's Isaiah 49:2. Rocky read this for us, and I love how God describes the situation. And it's easy to read this and think, oh, he's talking about Isaiah. But if you know what being a Christian is, you know that he's talking about you. And this is a great description of anybody who belongs to God. Isaiah 49, verse 2. And he's made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he has concealed me, and he has also made me a select arrow. He has hidden me in his quiver. So when you belong to God, when you become a Christian, I think it's kind of significant to think that you are one of his arrows. And those are designed for a purpose. I'm going to read one more passage here. It's 1 Kings 22, and I'll give you kind of a summary of the situation, and then we're going to read part of this. So here's 1 Kings 22. About beginning in verse 1, you'll read about how Ahab, as you will know, was a king who did a lot of damage. He needed to be stopped. For years, he and his wife Jezebel were causing a lot of damage physically and especially spiritually. He ended up setting up an alliance with Jehoshaphat. Was a pretty good king, except he was bad at alliances. That was one of his flaws. But in general, Jehoshaphat was a pretty good guy trying to do the right thing. In fact, they're going to go up against an enemy together, and Ahab gets all his yes men together and says, should we go out there and fight these guys? And all the prophets that are his yes men say, yep, you're going to win. Go for it. And Jehoshaphat's looking around at all these yes men, these prophets. He says, isn't there a prophet of God here? And you probably remember Ahab's response. He says, well, there's one guy, Micaiah, but I hate him. That's what he says, literally. He says, I hate him because he never tells me what I want to hear. And Jehoshaphat says, we need to talk to this guy. And at first, almost with sarcasm, Micaiah comes out and says, oh yeah, go for it, you're going to win. He says, no, tell me the truth. He says, you're not coming back. This is it, Ahab. You are not coming back. So here's what happens. Ahab's going to second guess. He says, I want to come back. So even though he's he's evil. He thinks he's got a plan here on how to get back safely. Here's 1 Kings 22:29. So when it refers to the king of Israel, it's talking about Ahab. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up against Ramoth Gilead. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, so this is Ahab talking to Jehoshaphat. Here's his plan. I will disguise myself and go into the battle, but you put on your robes. So the king of Israel, or Ahab, disguised himself and went into battle. So he's got this great plan. Nobody's not going to know who he is. Now the king of Aram had commanded, these are the bad guys coming against him. Now the king of Aram had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, saying, do not fight with small or great, but with the king of Israel alone. In other words, I want Ahab. If you do anything today, kill Ahab. That's the plan. So when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, surely it is the king of Israel. So they thought Jehoshaphat was Ahab, and they know their mission is to kill Ahab. And they turned aside to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. Verse 33, when the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, it's not Ahab, they turned back from pursuing him. So that saves Jehoshaphat's skin. Verse 34, now a certain man, doesn't even name who he is, drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel in a joint of the armor. So he said to the driver of the chariot, turn around, this is Ahab talking, and take me out of the fight, for I'm severely wounded, and he dies. The reason I bring this up is here's a literal arrow shot just randomly, but it does exactly what needs to be done. Ahab needed to be stopped. Now, if you were to go up to this guy, doesn't even give his name, it says a certain man. He had more than one arrow. He had a quiver of arrows. And if you were to look at this arrow that changed everything, changed the course of human history, and defeated Ahab, it looked like all the other arrows. In this case, it was the perfect one. It was the perfect arrow. It was the perfect moment. When you belong to God, you are one of his arrows. And he deals with things in which there is a perfect time, a perfect place, and a perfect shot. The arrow does not choose the target. That's kind of important to keep in mind. Just like with Gideon, he was an arrow. He's like, I don't even want to be fired if you don't mind. I just assume stay in the quiver. The arrow does not aim itself. It has one job, fly true. That's its only true assignment. We get to make choices, but one of the biggest choices you'll ever make is putting yourselves in the hands of God. Here's Isaiah 49, verse 2, one more time. Isaiah 49, 2. The more I look at this, I think it's a great description for us as Christians. And he has made my mouth like a sharp sword. Other verses will refer to this and make it very clear. He's talking about the Bible. That's what in the New Testament the sword is clearly used. So the words that you have in your mouth, the word of God, makes you a candidate for being the arrow that's needed. In the shadow of his hand, he has concealed me. In other words, I'm being saved for specific purpose. And he has also made me a select arrow. In other words, I want that one. He has hidden me in his quiver. I don't know, think about this. Even Isaiah and Gideon don't have what we have. They didn't have the complete word. They don't have the sword. They didn't have the sword that we have. So I guess I want to tell you all this to say, when you get up tomorrow, when you get up each morning, don't forget who you are. You're the right person at the right place at the right time. And if you let him, God will use you well. If there's anything that's standing in your way of that, I guess and it's interfering with you flying true, please make the most of this opportunity. You can either come forward or pull somebody aside before we leave and make sure that you belong to God fully, because he will use you well. And he's a really good shot. Hope you think about this while we stand together and sing.